This is Open to Debate. I'm John Donvan. Hi, everybody. And today I am pleased to be joined by somebody I work with closely here at Open to Debate, who is often behind the scenes making these debates happen, Lia Matthow. Lia, hi. Welcome to the desk.
Hey, John. So nice to be joining you on the other side of the camera.
So I want to explain to people very briefly your role here. You are our chief of content, which means you are the person who really pulls all of these debates together along with the team that you lead. You create the topics, you come up with the language, you then find debaters who are willing, actually, though they disagree with each other, to sit down with one another at the same place and have a civil, we hope, conversation, or at least a civil argument.
Well, as you mentioned, it's a team sport, and it's an incredibly talented team that we work with here. What we do every week is we really have the pleasure of addressing a single topic, a really deep dive, whether it's tariffs, AI governance, foreign policy debates. All of these questions have a very strong dichotomy, fierce competition of ideas. What we do is really so important to a functioning democracy.
Well, as all of you know, most of the time we do debates, but every now and then we have a conversation about debate, and that's what's happening in this episode. Lia and I are going to do this one together.
And in this case, in a way, it's about one debate of historic magnitude. That debate happened in June of last year, Joe Biden's debate performance in particular. John, over to you.
Thank you, Lia. Well, we expect you've heard by now about the book Original Sin, which argues that Joe Biden's terrible debate performance last year was entirely predictable and a tragic moment in his career, but also a major fail on the part of many whom the book argues participated in a cover-up of Biden's health, with disastrous consequences for the Democratic Party and for trust, including trust in the news media. All around a bad episode. The book, the full title of which is Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again, was a joint effort by two journalists. Jake Tapper is an Emmy Award-winning television journalist and a CNN anchor and author of several books. For this one, he teamed up with Alex Thompson, the national political correspondent for Axios, who won a prestigious journalism award for his coverage of President Biden only last year. They are joining us as part of our Think Twice book series to discuss that notorious, infamous debate and all of the reckonings before and after with Biden's declining cognitive faculties. Jake and Alex, thanks so much for joining us on Open to Debate.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Hi, Jake. Hi, Alex. So the debate seemed to be the turning point in this story. And since we're a debate organization, this is interesting to us in a singular way. I think the first sign of trouble or something awry was the fact that this debate took place in June.
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen?
Once it became clear that the Biden team was rejecting the Commission on Presidential Debates, which the Trump people had already done, then there was, I think, a scramble from television networks, not just CNN, but others, to try to get the first debate. And the Biden people, I believe, had made the calculation that an earlier debate would be better because the sooner, in their view, it could be a choice election. It's not just a referendum on Biden, but a choice between Biden or Trump. They felt the sooner that happened, the better. And then once there were people inside the administration and inside the campaign who didn't think a debate would be good because for any number of reasons, including the fact that Biden was losing his ability to do it. But after the Her report came out with that sentence about how he would present to a jury Biden as a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory, they figured they had to show that he was up to the job. So I was just alerted that CNN had made the bid and had put it in there, and then it all just fell into place.
Another thing that was cooking around that time was a lot of focus on what the format was going to be. And we were following it at Open to Debate because we are always evaluating how the presidential debates go. It's just an interest of ours. We had actually commissioned some researchers at Princeton to do a study that's called Discourse Correction. And we had seen that over time, the debates, in the opinion of a lot of people, had deteriorated in terms of civility, real substance happening. And we had come up with suggestions for different kinds of things like, most specifically controlling microphones, things like that. This debate did have some new rules in effect. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. The decision was made ultimately, and and everybody agreed to it. And I don't know the origins of it, but that there wouldn't be an audience. And I think that was probably a reflection of how audiences in previous events had imposed themselves into the event. And that to make it more substantive, an audience would not be preferable. There was also the decision to cut off microphones if you weren't speaking. And I think that was a nod to the previous debates between Biden and Trump, where they interrupted each other, although Trump obviously interrupted more. And so those were two of the major decisions. And there was criticism from conservatives about those decisions because they thought Donald Trump played well to the crowd and Donald Trump should be able to, let Trump be Trump. But ultimately, there were also people in the Trump orbit who thought, actually, this will be good for him. It will make him more disciplined. But in any case, that's what they agreed to, Biden and Trump.
I was on a guest on Mike Smerconish's radio show the day of the debate, talking again also about the issue of fact checking. And I have taken the position moderating our debates that as a moderator, I'm not the fact checker.
Right.
I take the position the debaters have to check each other's facts. And my argument is that I would just go down a rabbit hole of probably debating with the debater about what the facts are.
Right.
But that was a debate where you did not engage in fact checking, as I recall.
We had a couple fact checks on hand if we felt like they needed to be, things that were like of real importance, like about January 6th or in my own head, the safety of childhood vaccines. But as a general rule, I share your philosophy about debates, not about interviews, but about debates, because it's about Lincoln versus Douglas. It's not about Lincoln versus Horace Greeley versus Douglas or whomever. I mean, like it's the two are supposed to debate each other. In fact, Ronald Reagan's one of his most famous quotes is "There you go again," and he's debating, I believe, Jimmy Carter, and he's pushing back and fact checking Jimmy Carter. And I think that the opinion of CNN executives, and I agreed with it, was that's really not for us to do. And also, in addition to going down the rabbit hole of this one issue, and also you inserting yourself in something that's supposed to be about Biden versus Trump, beyond all that is the question of, okay, and what question are you not going to ask because you have decided that this fact check is more important than, say, climate change? Is it really that much more important than climate change? I mean, so those were all the factors going into it. And so generally, I just agree with your philosophy.
As the debate co-moderator, what were you thinking in those early moments of the debate? And
had you seen Joe Biden before the debate started?
No, I had not seen either one of them before the debate started. He showed up really late for the run-through. Both Trump and Biden showed up late, but Trump showed up and look, he's a creature of television, and he knew exactly where's my mark, what's my camera, like he knew exactly what to say and do. And what if I want to interject one more thing after the back and forth? Biden, the debate started at 9:00, and by 8:00, Biden still hadn't shown up. And somebody at CNN called the White House and said, "Where is he? He should be here just to see the arena, whatever." And Anita Dunn told the CNN executive he doesn't feel like he needs to go. He's done so many of these, which also gives you an idea of what was going on in the head of Joe Biden. Anyway, CNN impressed upon them the importance for him to show up. He shows up at like 8:30, 8:32. And Dan and I usually, we'd be out there probably.
Dana Bash,
my co-moderator. Mm-hmm. Normally we would be out there like half an hour before just to sit on the stage and get comfortable and, try to like relax. It's a very high pressure situation. We didn't get out there till 10 minutes of. And when Biden walked out at 9 p.m. after we introduced him, I remember thinking, oh my God, like I'm already tired and upset that I have to be here until 10:30 for this debate. Like what is going through his mind? And I was keeping in mind what a story Alex had broken a year and a half before about how the White House was basically limiting not just his public events, but his events to 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So that was even before he said a word. I was like, oof. And then he's kind of shuffling out. I'd seen him. He looked every one of his 81 years, every day of it. And then the debate started. He had thin, reedy voice. He had a cold, obviously. But it was that second answer, I believe it was, in that first like economic block where he just completely lost his train of thought. and was unable to, he didn't even know what he was saying. He was just reaching for words and phrases. It was really uncomfortable. That's the answer when he gave the, we finally beat Medicare answer, which still doesn't make any sense as to what he's talking about. We had iPads so we could communicate with the control room. And I wrote, holy smokes. It was rough. Dana Bash passed me a note. He just lost the election. This debate was focused on, he had to do one thing. He had to show the country that he was not too old to do the job. That was it. Nobody was expecting him to be, the best debater in the world. He just had to show that he was up to doing the job. And the debates solidified in the minds of millions of Americans he was not.
Alex, where were you watching from?
I was in Atlanta in the media holding room. So it's like right outside the quote unquote spin room where everyone goes in afterward. And I'd been reporting pretty aggressively. I mean, I've been reporting on like Biden's age, the way they were concluding him back in 2021. But I started becoming very aggressive in April of 2023, mostly because that's when sources actually started sort of talking about some of the limitations. I think because there were serious concerns, even if they were still insisting that he was up to the job at the moment, and they felt he could finish the first term. There were serious concerns throughout the White House and the administration that he was not up to serving through 2029, which is what he was running to do. And there was also concern that he had the requisite energy and ability to, run a formidable reelection campaign. And so I was like watching the debate on the screens, because we all watch it on screens, and you can sort of like see sort of the jaws sort of drop, and like the Slack messages like going back and forth, the tweets all going. And then I remember immediately after the debate, this surreal scene where the Republicans, all the Trump surrogates, all fan out, and there's not a Biden surrogate to be seen for like 25 minutes. Nobody.
Really unusual.
Yes, very unusual. And then what happens is, the Biden people sort of were in many ways like very, they did not like the press. They were sort of disdainful. And so they had previously planned to, like, what they were thinking of is upend the spin room. We're basically going to do like a mini press conference with just like a few people in one spot. Usually you have like tons of surrogates span out and reporters get to ask individual questions. But they were so flummoxed by the debate performance that they ended up coming out in this phalanx of like, I still remember Senator Warnock, Governor Gavin Newsom, and there was one other, and along with a few Biden surrogates. And they were like, we'll take your questions. Basically, each one made a small speech, like 2 minutes. They took like 3 or 4 questions, and they got the hell out of there. Wow. And it was a sign of that they did not know what was going on. And the sheer sort of, internal panic, even if they had not recognized.
Do you remember, Lia, we were hosting, our organization, Open to Debate, was hosting a debate viewing party in Manhattan at a club with our fans and supporters. And do you remember within 3 minutes or so how
I had been trying to put together a debate, should Biden step aside? Obviously, this question was in the air about the age, the polling, and I could not get anyone, even Democrats who were on the record with some of these views, to join us. And then within 5 minutes of the debate, I received an email from someone, hey, if you're still doing this, I'm game. So it was a sign to us, and, other emails and texts, and that people were going to start peeling off, and that this was a real game changer.
What does that tell you?
I was just going to say, listen, Democrats rightly mock Republicans for saying one thing in private about Trump and another thing publicly, right? In private, they're like, this is a disaster. He's a madman. And then they'll go and like, what a great president, an ethical president, And the thing is, but like they were doing the exact same thing about Joe Biden. To your point, they were saying a lot of these things off the record. They knew he was not up to doing the job for 4 more years. But they did not say anything, both out of fear of the consequences to their own political career. As Dean Phillips, who ran against Biden in the primary because of this issue, I think we have him saying like the first whale that spouts gets harpooned, something along those lines.
Yeah.
And so there was fear of the political retribution. And there was also, I think, a sincere fear that if they spoke out, it was only going to make Biden dig his heels in more. And then it was going to end up helping Donald Trump in the end.
The other thing I think it shows is, look, these issues of age and acuity and health in general are very sensitive ones to talk about, whether it's Ronald Reagan's Alzheimer's, or any number of senators or members of the House. Look, I mean, honestly, do you know that in the last, I think, 13 or 14 months, I think there are 5 or 6 House Democrats who have died in office? And in office, not just like having recently been in office. They were in office and they died. And there just isn't, people are polite about these issues because of the sensitive nature of them. There's nothing more personal. But when it comes to public service, at the same time, that you are battling an illness or dying or old or ailing or infirm or whatever, there are questions to be brought up. The Hur report, where Robert Hur gets 5 hours behind the scenes with President Biden and comes out and says, and
that was to the prosecutor was looking at his handling of secret files, top secret files.
Biden had if you having read the report and reported on this extensively for the book, like Biden had without question mishandled classified information. But Robert Hur had concluded A, he had, but B, he wasn't going to prosecute because C, he thought that Joe Biden, having spent 5 hours with him behind closed doors, would present to a jury as unconvictable. And, that's in October 2023. So the Overton window shifted a bit after the Hur report, mainly among the media, I would say, where we in the media, news media, felt more comfortable talking about what was obviously happening in front of the cameras. For politicians, it was still something that was very difficult for them to talk about publicly. Only one Democratic senator called for Joe Biden to drop out. Only one Democratic governor called for Joe Biden to drop out, and maybe a few dozen House Democrats. But it wasn't the entire Democratic Party saying it publicly. It was the entire Democratic Party almost saying it privately. But still, these issues are so sensitive, and people look, the incentive structure in the political world does not reward courage.
But was the debate itself a crack in that wall? And in
yes.
the same sense that Lia, starts hearing from people, okay, I'll do the debate.
Exactly.
Now.
Yes, exactly. It was a crack in the wall. It was the Overton window blowing up on it. Just, okay, now we can talk about this. Now we can have an open conversation.
I do think it was a crack in the wall, but let's be honest. The reason the wall cracked was because they were like, he can't win and he's going to bring us down with him. It was not an act of courage to finally be like, he's too old. They only did it because now it had become clear that it was such a significant political liability that it was going to affect them too.
So basically, the way you report it, Joe Biden and his inner circle sort of unilaterally decide he's going to run again.
Yep. I would say just Joe Biden. Yeah.
Right. And, he ran as a bridge candidate in 2020. So is there some kind of process failure here? Should there have been,
the process failure is that there was no process.
He wouldn't let his own guy, John Donvan, do the polling.
100%, yeah.
If he ran as a bridge candidate, is the Democratic Party very culpable here and sort of not having another plan set in place?
Sure. I think the way they use the levers of power within the DNC to basically, not allow any sort of potential challenge, including not just from Dean Phillips, but RFK Jr. and Marine. They try to keep people off ballots. The Democracy Existential Threat Party is like literally trying to keep candidates off the ballot in places like Wisconsin in the primaries. I also think, to your point, what was the process failure? There was no process. And and the dynamics in the inner circle were such, and part of this, I think you can blame some lack of courage within the inner circle, and also for Joe Biden for creating an environment in which dissent was was seen as a sign of potential disloyalty. So basically, Biden and Jill and Hunter make clear, I'm running. And the thing is, all presidents run for 2 terms. They had plans for a second term. Jill had plans of travel she was going to do in a second term. He felt he was owed it. This is a guy that's always felt underestimated. He felt like the world's on fire, Putin's at the door. I just got done huge, parts of, bipartisan legislation done. I had a better midterm result than Obama or Bill Clinton. I'm owed this. And then it was made clear to the entire inner circle, he's running. And there were people in the inner circle that had concerns, but no one ever got in his face.
So that sounds wrong-headed, but not nefarious. Yet your book is not called The Big Mistake. It's called Original Sin. Mm-hmm. And you allude to a cover-up, which is a big step beyond.
Yeah. Well, there was clearly an effort. Some of the steps that they took to make him look his best, to hide his worst, were innocent enough, 100%. And it's the job of any staffer to make the president look as good as possible. So he needs a teleprompter. Fine. He needs note cards. Fine. He's best between these hours. Okay. I could understand all of that. But by the end of his presidency, or not even the end, by 2023, the teleprompter he needs to give an address to the American people, he's also using in a private fundraiser for 40 people.
In a living room somewhere.
In a living room somewhere. Mm-hmm. By the end of 2023, his people start cordoning him off and preventing the cabinet from seeing him, not national security people like Blinken and Austin, but almost every other cabinet secretary just doesn't get to see him. Members of the White House staff don't get to see him. Democratic leaders in Congress don't get to see him. They are hiding him. And that's why what happened on the debate on June 27th was so shocking, because there had been such a deterioration and such a hiding of these horrible non-functioning moments that when it was exposed to the world, everybody was stunned. I mean, yes, we'd all seen him age, but we had not all seen him as non-functioning. They kept hiding that increasingly non-functioning Biden, who couldn't follow his own train of thought, who didn't recognize top staffers or people who he'd known for years, like George Clooney.
He literally did not recognize George Clooney.
He did not recognize George Clooney at that June fundraiser. And that was why Clooney wrote that op-ed after the debate, because he's like,
remind us of that op-ed.
Yeah, that's the origin of the op-ed. He says, like, the Joe Biden that we all saw the night of the debate is the Joe Biden I saw backstage at the fundraiser, and that's what he means. And these are really uncomfortable, awful things to talk about. I mean, my parents are in their 80s right now. Like, I understand what this is. My grandparents lived till their 90s. I've seen this before. It's sad, but this is the reason why the American people were hip to this long before the news media or the Democratic politicians. People might not know what the intricacies of tariff policy mean. They know what aging is. They know what it means to have somebody in your life who has a good day and a bad day, and a good moment where they don't recognize you. A bad moment where they don't recognize you, and a good moment where they're energized by the crowd. People recognize this.
So it's really part of the Biden family mythology that you get up, that, you survive terrible tragedies, multiple brain aneurysms, and somehow you'll come through. Do you think maybe his inner circle just thought this was another one of those times? And then the decline, I think, as you report in 2023, 2024, happens fairly rapidly. Do you think they just kind of ran out of time and thought that he was the only candidate who could beat Trump?
Well, to your first question, absolutely. They just saw this as another time. And they actually still think that, just listen to Joe Biden now on the View. They still think that he could have won. They basically think he was driven out and the Democratic Party lost its mind and they made a mistake, and that Joe Biden could still be president and a very effective president at that right now. Like, the Biden theology, while it has less congregants than it used to, is still alive and well with that inner circle. And it is. And listen, there's reason for that belief. The number of times that Biden has been knocked down and has gotten back up and defied his naysayers and defied the elites of his party and in the media, it has given, faith to the people around him that he will always, perform.
He had a good State of the Union. He went to Ukraine. There were some examples.
Sure.
Absolutely. And I think, like, even though his debate prep was middling, if not bad at best, people in there were still confident. We have a red light performer. Mm-hmm. He's always going to rise to the occasion. But the part of the problem with, like, a sort of theology, as we describe it, is that there's not a lot of time for dissent, and people that raise questions are often labeled as heretics. And that's what happened. You mentioned John Anzalone before. John Anzalone is, worked for Biden in 1988, 1987, and that presidential race has been with him forever, was on the 2020 race. He had some polling and had some questions about a reelection and was told no, we don't need you. And, that lesson was learned by everyone in their circle of even if you see something, you don't say something.
Joe Biden has been through some of the worst possible things that fate could throw at somebody. And even right now, he's battling prostate cancer. Horrible. We all wish him the best. The book gets into, as Alex said, the theology of the mythology and theology of Joe Biden. And part of that is his legitimate ability to get up even after life has knocked him to the floor, whether it's a debilitating childhood stutter or that horrible car accident that killed his wife and daughter or the death of Beau, and on and on and on. It is a tragedy, this book, and what happened to him in this country. It is a tragedy. And one of the aspects of the tragedy that makes it Shakespearean is the very quality that so many people love about him, his ability to withstand pain and get up and still be a source of empathy and still be thriving and working in the political arena. That very quality, that determination is what sealed his doom. And his presidency predicated on the idea that he was going to save the country from Donald Trump by not listening to the facts, not realizing what was going on with himself until it was too late. He delivered the country right back into Donald Trump's hands.
We said at the beginning that one of the losses in this is the loss of trust in the media. I'm curious, how do you rate yourselves on having covered this story? And then a follow-up, you're getting a lot of acrimony from a lot of different directions for the book. I wanted you to discuss that experience as well.
So if you'd asked me on November 4th how good of a job I had done on this story, I would have given myself an A-, because I had been pretty aggressive for a while. But after reporting this book with Jake and interviewing all these 200 people and realizing the extent of everything I didn't know, I'd give myself a B-, because there was just so much going on behind the scenes. And, some of that's based on sources, but some of it, there was, when you're out on a limb, you sort of look around and you feel a little isolated. I feel I should have been even more aggressive. The poll showed 70% of people thought that Joe Biden wasn't up to it. And I don't think in aggregate, the mainstream media coverage of the issue represented what other people were seeing. And I think if you were independent or conservative that was I'm seeing this with my eyes and I'm not seeing the media, you have a right to be a little frustrated. But I think it's important to have the conversation because acknowledging errors builds trust. Being defensive about them further erodes it. I don't think it's end times here. I just think, but it is a moment for reflection.
Every interview in this book, except for one, was done after the election. And obviously, we would have reported, Alex or I separately, any of these scoops in the book, Biden not recognizing George Clooney, any of them, if we'd known them at the time. And, some of the people we talked to expressed regret that they hadn't come forward sooner. But the bottom line is so much of this was predicated on what Democrats perceive to be the existential threat of a Donald Trump presidency. And any leaking of any of this information would only help Trump and hurt either Biden or Kamala Harris. And so they didn't come forward. I feel tremendous humility looking at my coverage of this. And I can point to me asking Biden to be, me asking him to pledge to be transparent in 2020 about his health, me asking about his, polls suggesting people thought he was too old in 2022. But as a general note, I don't think I was aggressive enough. And there is at least one interview that I wish I had done completely differently in 2020. But I'm not the only reporter. I mean, I think that other people also, I think there are very few journalists who can look back at their coverage and think, I really tried my best to get to the bottom of the story. There are some. I think Annie Linsky and Siobhan Hughes from the Wall Street Journal are two who got raked over the coals. I would also argue that a lot of people in the conservative media who are taking a victory lap, they are correct. They were right about the general issue. As for the acrimony, which I don't really want to address, but I'm sure you want me to, I understand all of it. There are Democrats saying, why are you even covering this? You should be covering Donald Trump, which, by the way, we do every day, for me for 2 hours and Alex and Axios. But I mean, the argument George Clooney would make is, how do you think you got Trump? You got Trump because Joe Biden and his people were lying to the country. So the criticisms from the conservatives are because I think in a lot of ways, Alex and I, especially me, were avatars for the news media writ large, and they were suspicious about Biden's acuity and saying so, and they feel like they were not listened to or respected, and so how dare we come along and now write this book? And I understand that. I would argue that this is investigative journalism, not just pointing at Biden and calling him a name, which is what some of these critics were doing at the time. Not all of them, but I mean, as a general note, conservative media was right on this general issue, even if some of their specific observations weren't particularly based on investigation.
You say this wasn't a joyous book to write. What do you hope comes from this? Any changes, reckoning, not just with the media, maybe with the way we assess candidates, cognitive tests? Have you thought about some of these solutions?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say a few things. I mean, like, while the book is about Biden,
right?
I think we write in there that, like, there are more universal themes to this story. You know, groupthink, cowardice, courage. You know, but in terms of specifics, things beyond those themes, one is. Listen, health cover-ups of presidents are not new in American history. You can go back to even George Washington, who hid some of his ailments at the time. You obviously have Woodrow Wilson. FDR was basically not fit to be president for another 4 years when he ran for his fourth term. JFK hid a lot of things. And Biden was not transparent. The fact is that this will happen again unless there is some sort of mechanism to force health disclosures of the person that has the nuclear arsenal. So I think one thing about, you know, and this isn't just a Biden thing. We don't know almost anything about Donald Trump's health. He has not been transparent at all. The other thing I would say for, you know, just in terms of the Democratic Party or just parties in general is something we talked about before, which is, you know, having the courage to say publicly what you aren't saying, what you're saying privately. And when you don't, when you're scared of being harpooned first, I think sometimes it can lead for you to sleepwalk into disaster. And like the last thing I'd say is, like, for the party that says that they are the defenders of democracy, they use the threat of Trump to justify doing a lot of undemocratic things. In order to, you know, pressure, basically like semi-rig the primary in Joe Biden's favor, to cast out anyone that, you know, raised any doubts.
This reminds me, John, you and I worked at ABC during the Iraq War, and this reminds me a lot of that reckoning too. The fact that the Bush administration had, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, the best possible reasons to want to go to war. They were really, truly convinced that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction and was going to use them. And they were not completely transparent. They were not completely honest. The media was intimidated and cowed, frankly. I don't know what kind of reckoning the media went through after that.
Did we learn that the constitutional device that is supposed to be in play here, the 25th Amendment, which is relatively new, I was not aware it's only about 58 years old, calls for the vice president and members of the cabinet, when they feel that the president is not able to carry out his duties, to remove him from power. Nothing like that happened. How do you assess that?
It should have. Honestly, it should have. But again, our political system provides very little incentives for courage. I mean, people who write these constitutional amendments or the Constitution in general are lofty thinkers, but they don't necessarily think like how would an actual politician act in such a circumstance? Would Vice President Kamala Harris be willing to convene a cabinet and have a meeting and say, I don't think Joe can do this anymore? Would members of the cabinet come and like take her on good faith and not think it was just a power grab? I mean, that's not how actual politicians act.
Lia, as we like to do in these conversations, I think it's time for us to bring in some other voices. We've had some friends of the program who have been listening into the conversation, and we've invited them to come in with some questions. So the first person I'd like to bring in is Megan McArdle. Megan is a columnist and editorial writer for the Washington Post and the author of The Upside of Down: Why Failing Well is the Key to Success. And Megan, you've debated with us some time ago. It's so good to have you back in the program. So please come on in with your question.
Great to be back in the proud tradition of media navel-gazing. I, like you, have some regrets about how I did my coverage. I was relatively early. I wrote a column about it in 2022, but I pulled my punches. I asked whether he could run rather than whether he should be president. Alex, you gave a great speech at the White House Correspondents' Dinner saying that the media needs to examine what it did. But how do we fix this? I'm not sure that just fessing up, in part because I think that partisanship played a role here. Most of the people in the legacy media, like me, voted for Joe Biden. And I feel like if this had happened to Donald Trump, we probably would have gotten the story a little earlier. So I wonder if you could speak to whether you think partisanship played a role, and more broadly, how do we actually make sure that this doesn't happen again?
I wish I had good answers. I would say, do I think partisanship played a role? Yeah, I do. I think that newsrooms in DC and New York, where a lot of national media is based, those are liberal towns. I think newsrooms are more full of Democrats than Republicans in those. And I think you can also be privately a proud Democrat and be like a really straight reporter, by the way. But I do think in some cases, I think people let their own private political beliefs influence their coverage. The thing is, I mean, Jake was talking about Iraq. Like, this will happen again, like an instance of groupthink and reporters sort of like going along. I mean, maybe like one of the answers is, get out of DC more and touch grass because I do think this city has a way, I think it's an old expression by Gary Hart or something where DC is always the last to get the news.
Megan, I'm a religious reader of yours, and it's nice to meet you Zoom to Zoom.
It's very nice to meet you as well. I'm a huge fan, so.
I appreciated what you wrote about the book in the Post, and thank you for doing it. I think I didn't vote for Biden or Trump. I can't stand either party, to be quite honest, that wasn't a bias of mine in terms of shaping my reporting. But like, what was shaping my reporting was, I think the fact that there were just a lot of people lying to us, and I should have just been more skeptical about the fact that they were lying to us. But there were just so many people on the inside and so many Democratic legislators and so many members of the cabinet and everything that were just completely gaslighting the country.
Megan, what do you see as the lasting legacy of this whole episode?
Like Alex, I think that this is a huge issue for trust in the media. But it wasn't just that. It was that there were clear videos of him acting very strangely, having all of these issues. And a lot of outlets are running Democratic spin about how these videos are cheap fakes. And it literally is the moment where we are saying to the public, who are you going to believe, us or your lying eyes? And that was devastating. And so the trust that was already pretty broken was absolutely smashed. They're just horrified. And they can't understand how that could have been an honest mistake. Jake, I would like to ask you, do you think that the media would have gotten this story sooner if it was Trump?
I don't, actually, because these issues of health are so sensitive to talk about and to report. And as you say, yes, we saw weird moments of Joe Biden. We also see weird moments, and they're different. They're not the same issue. They're not acuity issues, but we see weird moments of Donald Trump calling Nancy Pelosi, Nikki Haley, and the like. But it's impossible to say, as you noted, this is what's going on behind closed doors if nobody behind those closed doors is talking. So I really just don't think that. I mean, there are a million questions I'd love to ask about what's going on behind the scenes in the Trump White House that we can't get because they're not talking. I mean, I get that that's their job is not to leak to us anymore. And this is a much less leaky Trump White House than the first one. So I guess I just don't think so. That's not to say that I'm denying that there's a liberal bias in the media. I'm not denying that 100%. But on health and sensitivity issues, I don't think so. In 2019, Donald Trump went to Walter Reed, and we still don't know what he went to Walter Reed for. It still hasn't been reported, and they still haven't disclosed it. And so I think that in itself answers that question.
Hey, Megan, thanks so much for joining us again. It's been great to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Next up, I'd like to welcome Alex Shepard. Alex is a senior editor at The New Republic, where he's covered politics since 2015.
Hey, it's good to be with you. And I'm wondering, in your conversations with the sources in your book and in, your subsequent reporting right now, if you do get a sense that there is a kind of earnest reckoning or self-reflection within the Democratic Party, or if they see this as an opportunity to kind of move on, right? They can kind of unload, everything that had been bubbling up for the last, 4 or 5 years with their concerns about this president, and then sort of return to business as usual. Do you see a shift within the Democratic Party happening yet, or do you think it's yet to come, or do you think it's just not going to come at all?
It's a good question. I mean, certainly while we were reporting this book, it reminded me of that that meme of the 3 Spider-Mans all pointing at each other. No, okay.
I know it,
but it's like and many people were pointing to the Politburo. Many people were pointing to the DNC, other lawmakers. The truth is, they all share blame. The Politburo deserves blame because they were the ones that were really in charge and saw Biden the most. But it's also the reason why we include many anecdotes of members of Congress seeing Joe Biden up close, not often, but up close, and they had internal concerns and they didn't say anything. To your point, is there a reckoning? I mean, certainly reporters are asking these questions more, and you can see that Democrats are struggling to answer. And long gone is the answer of, well, he's as sharp as ever and he was on his game. No Democrat is now saying what they were saying 9 months ago. And clearly they are, we've seen many disparate answers. You've also, and who knows if it's going to gain any traction, but you saw in the California governor's race, Antonio Villaraigosa basically say that Javier Becerra and Kamala Harris have no business being in the race because of their connection with if you want to call it a scandal or this cover up, whichever. So I think now how long that lasts, is this just like a blip? I don't know. I think part of it actually will depend on how the Trump presidency goes. The worse from the Democratic perspective, the worse the Trump presidency goes, I feel the more anger you are going to see from Democratic voters toward people involved in the Biden presidency. But if there is a reckoning, we don't know yet. I would say we're just at the very, very beginning of it.
If I could just add, I sense that reporters are going to ask Democrats about what they knew and when they knew it. And I sense that there are a lot of independent voters and some Democratic voters who want to know exactly what happened. And look, it's not just conservatives buying this book, right? I mean, this book, a lot of Democrats are reading this book. We had an event at the 930 Club last night here in D.C. This is not MAGA Central, and there were a lot of people there, and they want to hear what we learned. So I think that the Democrats who want to run for president and other higher office, I don't think that we only want to look forward this, which is what Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are attempting to do. I think this was a huge scandal. I think that the Democratic Party owns it, and I think that they need to reckon with it. I find it odd that Alex and I have had more to say about our roles as reporters in this. Not that we shouldn't be talking about it. I'm happy to own anything I've ever done or not done. But this was the Democratic Party did this. Joe Biden, Jill Biden, Hunter Biden, the Politburo, Democratic leaders, donors, they saw this and nobody spoke up, or very few people spoke up. And the ones who spoke up got hammered. Dean Phillips, Robert Hur, Annie Linsky, and Siobhan Hughes of the Wall Street Journal, and on and on. I think there does need to be a reckoning. I find it incredibly disingenuous for the answer of I never saw anything like about this from people who, in Washington. I tend to accept it a little bit more from governors who are hundreds of miles away, but people in Washington, D.C. who had private meetings with Joe Biden, I just don't buy it for most of them. I just don't buy that they never saw anything.
Thanks so much for joining us, Alex.
Thank you.
Our third and final question does not come from the world of media, and that's because Tracy Gendron is an internationally recognized gerontologist and executive director of the Virginia Center of Aging at Virginia Commonwealth University. So, Tracy, very, very interesting to hear what question you're going to come up with for our two guests. Please join us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I'm going to take us in a little bit of a different direction with a two-part question. So the word ageism appears only once in the book. And this is in the context of quoting a TV segment by Ari Melber. How do you think ageism factors into discussions in the media about competency of political candidates?
I think the reason we only use it once in the book is that ageism, while it can and is like a serious issue and a way to discriminate, it was it was, while it's a legitimate issue, it was weaponized by the Biden White House and the Democratic Party in order to excuse what was an actual decline. Calling out these things was not ageism. It was pointing out his serious problems for the job. And, and the Democratic Party also did this in a similar way with when they said that they were moving the South Carolina primary to be first because they wanted to elevate Black voices. Now, people finally admitted to us for this book that they used that for PR spin. They use the legacy of Black discrimination and their loyalty to the party to basically do something that would help Joe Biden politically. So I think the legacy of racism, legacy of ageism, they use those in order to protect Joe Biden in a very cynical way.
At the beginning of the book, we say the issue isn't his age per se; it was his abilities. But we cannot pretend that people don't tend to lose a step in their aging years, in their twilight years, in their 80s especially. They often do. They don't always do, but they often do. And I don't know if whatever debilitation he has is because of his age or because of something else. They have not been transparent about their health, so we don't know about President Biden's health, so we don't know. So the book is really the book is not about his aging, it's about his decline. But I certainly understand the question.
So in the book, you do mention that age per se is not, what you're talking about, that it's more about ability and competency. But yet when you contrast Joe Biden and Donald Trump as two men with a 3-year age difference, and both having difficulty expressing coherent messages for different reasons, the intense focus on one man is about age, but not on the other. So do you think that age and competency are conflated?
I think sometimes they are, but I think the issue with President Trump, as I've heard it expressed from experts, and as we covered in his first term, while certainly he's aging, and I think he's, 78 now, 79? He's 3 years younger. He would have been in high school at the same time as Joe Biden. He would have been a freshman when Biden was a senior. The issues that I've heard expressed about Donald Trump, especially when as pertain to the 25th Amendment in his first term, have to do with personality, not acuity. And it's just like two completely different, you would know this but much better than I, but it's just completely two different fields of science.
I'm curious, Tracy, what concern underlies the questions that you're asking?
That's a great question. So I think we very often use age when we mean competency. So, when we refer to he acts as an 81-year-old man does, well, there is no standard for what an 81-year-old man is. You can look at other 81-year-old men and women, and their level of functioning and competency is very different. So to focus on the abilities of that particular person rather than using the age as a proxy would be helpful, because otherwise we are kind of falling into ageism when we're primarily putting age first.
Yeah, the point is very well taken. Nancy Pelosi is older than Joe Biden, and I don't think voters would have had similar concerns if she had been president at the time. So I think the point of conflating competency and the number is well taken.
Thanks very much, Tracy, for joining the conversation. And on this age question, I was doing a little bit of research when I was looking at when the 25th Amendment was conceived of in the 1960s. It was because Lyndon Johnson took office after John Kennedy's death, didn't have a vice president for the rest of that term, and there was concern that the next in line was the Speaker of the House, John McCormick, that he was too old because he was 71 years old. 71. I look at that now. And then I look at Johnson stopped being president when he was about 60, 61. Obama and Clinton both stopped being president in their 50s. Richard Nixon was about 62 years old. Reagan was the exception. But the question, as we come to near the end of the conversation, that hadn't occurred to me until this moment, what are the implications now for the people who are elected representatives at the federal level or any level who are in their 70s? There is the whole, you can't rent a car in Europe if you're 75 years old or older.
Is that right?
You just can't.
Really?
Yeah.
I know you can't vote for Pope if you're a cardinal. If you're a cardinal over 80, did you know that?
But I did not know that.
Yeah, I learned that in this conclave. Cardinal since the 1970s, cardinals over the age of 80 are not allowed to participate in the conclave.
If you're a 75-year-old member of Congress, should you be wondering if everybody's looking at you at this point?
Well, you'd be in a big group of 75-year-old members of Congress, to be honest.
Yeah.
Look, there is resentment among younger members of Congress about how many older members of Congress can stick around. Mm-hmm. And I'm certainly not here to say that if you're 75 years old or 80 years old, you're incompetent or that you can't do the job as president or a member of the House or a member of the Senate. We wrote this book because there was clearly an issue with Joe Biden. I don't know if it's related to his age, whatever it is. It was out there and it was obvious at the debate, and we wanted to find out how much of that was actually going on behind the scenes. But for me to say he looked every day of his 81 years, that's just to say he looks like an old man. That's not to say that he's not able to function as president. Mm-hmm. The American people elected Joe Biden thinking he was too old. That's one of the reasons why his team thought that he could get reelected, with the American people still thinking he was too old. It's not about age per se. I could certainly foresee another person in his 80s after Donald Trump being president. I'm not saying that should not happen. What I am saying is if there is evidence that any president, age 40 or age 80, cannot do the job 24/7, we need to be able to have honest conversations about it.
I think that's an amazing place to end this conversation. Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson, thank you so much for joining us today.
I also want to thank everybody who asked questions, Megan and Alex and Tracy.
Great questions. Thank you.
And
thank you.
Finally, a big thank you to you, our audience, for tuning into this episode of Open to Debate. As a nonprofit working to combat extreme polarization through civil debate, our work is made possible by listeners like you and by the Rosencrantz Foundation and by supporters of Open to Debate. Robert Rosencrantz is our chairman. Our CEO is Clea Connor. Lia Matthow, whom you've met, my co-host this time, is our chief content officer. Elizabeth Kitzenberg is our chief advancement officer. Andrew Lipson is head of production. Michelle Deversini is our director of marketing. This episode was produced by Alexis Pangrazi and Marlette Sandoval. Editorial and research by Gabriella Mayer. Max Fulton provided production support. The Open to Debate team also includes Annalisa Cochran, Gabrielle Iannicelli, Rachel Kemp, Eric Gross, Linda Lee, Mary Regis, Tom Bunting, and Vlad Virtanen. Damon Whittemore mixed this episode. Our theme music is by Alex Clement, and I'm John Donvan, seeing you next time on Open to Debate.